Welcome everyone to this webinar, this AGPA webinar titled Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in Group Leadership. Consultants respond to excerpts of the series called Group. This is the first of a two-part series offered to the membership of AGPA. The second one will feature the work of Dr. Aaron Black in the Special Institute that took place at AGPA Connect in February 2021. I am Jan Morris, co-chair of the AGPA e-learning task force and fellow of AGPA. I will be the moderator for today's session. I will begin with a brief orientation to our task and then introduce our presenters. In 2019, Elliot Zeisel and 8 other actors created a series called Group, in which Elliot plays the part of the group leader, Dr. Ezra Hertzfeld, and the rest of the actors play group members. Elliot is also an executive producer of the program. Out of this effort came 13 episodes in which viewers get a chance to see group treatment in action. The series, which has been viewed on YouTube over 200,000 times so far, can be viewed in its entirety by searching YouTube for Group, Season 1, Episode 1, and proceeding from there. Today's webinar was created to give AGPA members an opportunity to view segments of this series and hear commentary from 3 consultants on how themes of diversity, equity, and inclusion could be addressed more fully. The purpose of this webinar series is to broaden the lens of the group leader and to present ideas about how we as group leaders can be more racially and culturally aware and competent in our group leadership. This 60-minute webinar will take a look at 3 excerpts from the group series, each 2 to 4 minutes in length, that our consultants thought would be rich opportunities to explore underlying themes related to racial and cultural diversity and difference that might be addressed more fully by the group leader. After viewing each excerpt together, our consultants will discuss their observations and responses to the material for about 15 minutes before we move on to the next segment. And now I am pleased to introduce the participants in today's webinar. Dr. Elliot Zeisel is a distinguished fellow of AGPA and has served as the vice chair of the Group Foundation for Advancing Mental Health. He is a founder of the Center for Group Studies and serves on the faculty. He is a past member of the AGPA board and the International Board of Certification of Group Psychotherapists. Dr. Zeisel has lectured on various aspects of analytic group therapy, both nationally and abroad. He maintains a private practice in New York, Austin, Texas, and Rochester, New York. Dr. Aaron Black holds a PhD in clinical psychology and maintains a full-time private practice in Rochester, New York, conducting individual, couples, and group psychotherapy, as well as providing supervision and consultation. A fellow and board member of AGPA and a faculty member at the Center for Group Studies in New York City, his teaching activities include running training groups and writing and conducting workshops about group psychotherapy. Aaron and Elliot have graciously agreed to be consultees in these 2 webinars and also to participate as consultants for each other. And now to introduce our panel of consultants for this webinar. Dr. Aziza A.B. Platt is a licensed psychologist providing culturally responsive individual and group psychotherapy, family therapy, and psychological assessment. She specializes in racial and cultural issues, trauma, and grief. She was inspired to get into mental health to contribute to efforts to make therapy more acceptable, accessible, and affordable, particularly for marginalized communities. Social justice and liberation are an indelible part of her work. Dr. Michelle D. Ribeiro is a licensed psychologist in Oregon at Oregon State University's Counseling and Psychological Services. She serves as an adjunct instructor in the undergraduate and graduate programs at George Fox University in Newberg, Oregon, Zanzibar University in Tanzania, and Oregon State University in Corvallis, Oregon. She is also the co-editor of 2 books, The College Counselor's Guide to Group Psychotherapy in 2018, and Examining Social Identities and Diversity Issues in Group, Knocking at the Boundaries in 2020, both by Routledge Press. Dr. Farouk Muhyiddin is a psychiatrist and an educator. He is currently the chair of psychiatry training and the director of the Psychiatry Residency Training Program at St. Elizabeth's Hospital in Washington, D.C. Dr. Muhyiddin is the current president of the Washington Psychiatric Society. He is an assistant clinical professor of psychiatry at George Washington University School of Medicine and faculty at Howard University School of Medicine. His primary interests include medical education and group psychotherapy. He's the past president of the Mid-Atlantic Group Psychotherapy Society. He is also co-chair of the Public Affairs Committee of AGPA. He is in private practice in Alexandria, Virginia, and he has presented and published on a wide range of topics in psychiatry. Thank you to all of you for being here today. And now, let's present the excerpts from the group series. I will give a couple of orienting remarks before each one to help the viewers know which names go with which group members. In our first segment, taken from season 1, episode 1, Henry, a white male who is new to group, is talking about why he is in group. Karina, a Latina woman, makes a sarcastic comment in the background. And then Manny, a Latino man, says, "This is why I don't date Latina women." And Tilda, a white woman, objects.
I slept around a lot, and emotional intimacy is something I'm much less comfortable with than physical intimacy.
That's a surprise.
Henry, just so you know, this is why I don't date Latino women.
Say a little more. What do you mean?
Yeah,
No, it was just a joke.
It's not a joke.
That's
There
just a
are
joke.
no jokes in the unconscious.
Oh, really?
Oh.
Right?
Oh, you're pissed at me. I see it now.
I'm hurt more than pissed. Yeah.
Well,
Manny,
what?
I want to punch you in the fucking face.
God,
right
I was making a joke. It's fine. It's just fine.
Why do you want to punch him in the face?
You're really being an asshole right now. You just made a hugely racist,
Racist?
complete generalization
talking
of
about
all
my own
Latina
race.
women.
That's not. I can't be racist towards Latinos. That's not how it works.
But you were racist towards Latinas. You're not a Latina.
Oh my God! Thanks for teaching me this thing.
Calling him an asshole is a diagnosis. What are you angry about?
I'm angry that you make a sweeping,
Generalization.
It was a
generalization
joke.
like
Oh my
that.
God! The PC shit. Like, okay. It's just a joke, guys. It's fine. I don't actually feel that way about all Latina women. It's just.
Manny, but at the moment when you do this, what effect are you having on Tilda? What's the goal with this?
Well, I don't think I'm having any
Go
effect
away.
on Tilda. I'm
Go
saying go away.
away.
But sadly, I know Tilda. I know I'm not affecting. I think feels how she feels about me, and I don't think I'm going to change her mind. So I'm just trying to make her.
What if instead of changing her mind, you just told her how you experienced her in the moment? Nobody's going to change Tilda until Tilda decides to be different.
I felt uncomfortable to confront you because I think probably what you're saying is true.
Okay, that's the excerpt. And tell us, consultants, what are your observations and your comments here?
Well, I think the first thing I notice is that the Latina woman who objects ends up sort of falling into the background of the conversation. And joke or no joke, or however these things come up, it feels like we didn't go back to her to give her enough space as the directly targeted person. And while Tilda was very vocal, I wonder, especially when people aren't always, we aren't always sure what their racial cultural identities are, how that landed for other people in that moment. And even if you are of a different race, you might think, wow, if he can say that here about that group, what else does he think about my group or other groups, and what else can be said here?
I agree. One of the first things that stood out for me is it felt like Ezra was centering whiteness by going after Tilda versus being able to recognize that there was a microaggression that could have happened with Karina. And, and Ezra says to Manny, it seems like you're fleeing Tilda. I think there was a parallel process with Ezra fleeing from Karina. And I think part of what might happen as a white therapist is there might be underlying discomfort to stay with an experience or a microaggression that we might not understand. And so it might feel more comfortable to stay with the white experience. And so it could have been felt like by kind of encouraging Manny to speak to Tilda, that felt like a more comfortable interchange versus being able to invite more exploration and potentially a corrective experience. So there could have been a lot of rich learning around Manny's internalized racism, possibly, and others' internalized racism by staying with Manny and Karina being able to express maybe how this has happened to her before, or has this invisibility of her identity as a Latina.
I think, and it's very interesting, this experience for me to comment on this segment. It's like Monday morning quarterback, Ezra is there actually in the field doing the work, and I am commenting on how it could be done differently, because it's like, in a group, there are always these forks to take. We follow one path or the other, and each one leads down a different way. And for different reasons, conscious or unconscious, a group leader may take one versus the other path. So this process is hopefully helpful for us to look at what paths are there and what could be taken. None of them is wrong because each one leads to a different outcome. So in this segment, what I really loved was demonstrating Ezra's ability for something that is not possible in general life, for many to get to that realization and to admit it to a group of people saying, yes, I have this racism with it. That was a really kind of an artful, masterful demonstration of how people can do this work in the group, which is not possible many other places. So that really, I liked to see that evolution. I can agree with what the comments of my other panel members about this, where other directions could have gone. One thing that I felt like that after many had talked about this, where I would have liked to go, if, in an ideal situation, in an ideal group, would be to encourage others to explore their own racism, because Manny is a minority and he is getting in touch with his own racism and is admitting and bringing it in. And yet it's within all of us, it's within all of the group members. So that would be, if this was an ongoing long-term group, this is where I might have wanted a group to go to see if other people have any reaction and where they in their racism in that moment. So that's where I hope.
Yeah, and I might add, I meant actually internalized oppression, but I completely agree with you about being able to open it up to the larger group, because racism lies in all of us at different levels of power. So
what might you have said to do that? I'm curious.
Are you asking me or Dr. Mohadin?
Please call me Farouk, it's easier.
Well, anyone who had that idea, I'm curious.
I might have said the same thing that I said here, that Manny's courage is to be admired because he's looking at his racism, and how about the others are feeling and looking at where their internal process might be, or internal responses to this might be. Mm-hmm. Does it trigger anything in anybody else? So maybe your group as a whole comment, not targeting anybody.
So that's a really fine point you're making, because while I do think in group as a whole terms, I more often than not am trying to follow the contact function. So in my work, I tend to go where the emotional action takes me. The contact function just being the last significant person exchange that unfolds in the process. either individual person or person-to-person exchange. So in this example that we're looking at, I think you're all making a very fine point. It is possible I could have turned after Manny and Karina have that exchange. I could have turned again to Karina and invited her to participate more directly, but that's not where the action took me. The action took me to Tilda, who in a sense was speaking for Karina. And because that was unfolding the way it did, that's where my attention went. Looking back at it, I could see there would be value in inviting Karina back into the action even later in the process. After the experience with Tilda helps Manny acknowledge his racism, his anti-Latina bias, it might have been helpful to then bring Karina back into the action and to find out how this exchange is now unfolded and what impact it's having on her. That would have been useful.
I think I'm curious about the contact piece of it, especially as a person of color and as a Black woman, and we're often deemed to be angry. I'm probably less likely to show emotion that would have you follow me. I'm probably, and especially after a comment where she's been, this was because she was sassy or whatever that was, right? Like, this is why I don't date Latina women. I can see how that might feel a little bit like you've been emotion policed, and maybe what you do in that moment is sort of shrink, like, I don't want to hear another thing about how I'm stereotypically X, Y, and Z. And so that feels like it might be tricky when there are people who've been socialized. You need to bring it down. You need to tone it down. You need to be quiet. You need not to advocate for yourself unless you're absolutely certain it's safe.
But being quiet is also a way of making contact. In the groups I work with, I pay at least as much attention to the people who are quiet as to the ones who are vocal. Your quietness is speaking volumes. And at some point, if I don't say something, assuming I don't say something directly to you, I hope someone in the group is going to contact you and say, Aziza, I notice you're not saying much. What are you holding for us? What are you holding for yourself? Somebody would get there eventually and contact you. And if they don't, I would. I think of group.
Yeah, I think that I hear you, and I hope that is what happens. I think sometimes it doesn't, because there's a dynamic that we bring in from the outside, and so sometimes maybe it's worth paying a little bit more attention to just to make sure that thing happens.
I can't agree with you more. I think of group like a good dinner party. What happens at a good dinner party? You don't just sit down and eat. You have to participate. You have to contribute. You have to say something for the experience to come together and for it to be enjoyable for everybody. So at my table anyway, you would not just be sitting and eating. Go ahead.
The other thing I was going to say, just around Dr. Platt's comment, is when you were saying with Tilda being the voice of Karina, I think that happens a lot in society, where white women or white people can be the voice for people of color. And so again, it's even more important to recognize how we might, again, kind of make someone invisible or feel like she can speak for another person. And when you're speaking for a person of color, it's got more connotations than just what's happening in group. And I think what we want to be mindful of is we are socialization and stereotyping and all those things that happen outside of group are also happening inside of group. And so if we're not aware, we might recapitulate some of the things that happen outside of group that can be harmful, or again, be experienced as a microaggression. But being a person of a white person who holds a lot of power, I might not recognize that or be aware of that because I'm so used to just doing what I do in my normal life. So I just wanted to recognize that what you said could be, again, experienced as another microaggression, that you were not allowing voice to Karina being a woman of color, and thinking, okay, Tilda understands her experience, where she has a completely different experience if we look through a racial lens.
Mhm.
I would add also, as a white group leader, I'm aware, I'm so identified in that clip with Ezra and the position that Ezra's in. And Aziza, is it Aziza or Dr. Platt? Do you have a preference?
I don't have a preference. I appreciate it.
Okay. I was thinking about what you said, and I was imagining myself and the sort of micro shame I might feel in a microaggression like that, and how sometimes I can tell myself that by not going to the person who's aggressed against, I'm somehow being protective, when really I'm participating in a kind of silencing, not intentionally, but because of like some little micro shame in myself that I'm trying to reconstitute.
And I think, Karen, it's a great point that you bring, because I think it's always this balancing act in some ways, just as Aziza said earlier, that sometimes it's the minority who has to hold all the discussion and who is the angry Black woman, but also still has to be participating and speaking and being bringing in the aggression. So sometimes it's better to use somebody else as well to bring that in and not put the burden on only the minority member. But later on, circling back to them is always, as Elliot was saying, is a great idea. So,
and that's what I can tell myself, that I don't want to burden the person with having to overwork when really I might be disempowering them.
See, I think that it's an important sentiment. And if you voiced it, it would probably land different. So even if we just gave voice to Karina, I know that sort of was directed at you, and I want to give you space, but also it feels like Tilda wants to say something and advocate for you. What would you like first? Because then she knows you're not ignoring me. You've not, she knows exactly what it is that's on your heart. And she also then gets to make some choices about how she moves for herself. And if she wants someone, to Michelle's point, to advocate for her, because sometimes that is nice. It takes the burden off you to not have to be the person. And it does feel good to have an ally in the group. But I always try and give people, let them know and get their permission for how we're about to move, so that they know that you are a full participant here.
You're creating an option that wouldn't be there otherwise. I like that.
I like that too.
Okay. Thank you very much for these really interesting, helpful comments. And now we're going to move on to the second segment, which runs a little longer and spans the end of season 1, episode 6 into episode 7. In this segment, Stuart, a Black man, is expressing sexual attraction toward 2 women in the group, Rebecca, an Asian American woman, and Tilda, a white woman. Pam, a white woman, has objections.
Tell me something. Would you be open to the possibility of sharing your fantasies about people in here, including Rebecca, as they occur to you?
More?
More. I mean, you're reporting something about that happened outside of group.
Yes.
My goal is to help you say as much as you can about your experience of yourself and people as it's unfolding in the process. So if you're feeling attracted to somebody, male or female in the room, this would be the place to describe it.
I'm feeling very attracted to you right now, and I looked at Tilda's lips several times. I'm feeling attracted to her too.
Well, fuck, the 3 of us.
So there's that.
There's that. That's it?
This is a lot for me, Doc. So
That's it for today?
yeah, for today, yes. But I will.
Now, when you say that's it for today, what is it you're racing away from?
I don't know, my heart's beating really fast right now, I know that.
Great, put some words to it.
I feel crazy saying this to them, telling them this.
What's crazy about it?
I don't know.
Outside of here it would be crazy, maybe.
Yeah.
But inside here, where it's safe, where you're not going to do anything, you're just talking.
Yeah.
What's crazy about that?
I feel like I'm disrespecting them.
Check it out.
Am I disrespecting any one of you?
No, I
By
think it's
saying
healthy
these
and
things?
normal. Thank you for your honesty.
I understand
that Stuart is shy and that this is a helpful way for him to put voice to it. But this did make, I'm probably hypersensitive right now, but can you tell me what the point of that is? Because I'm not sure that I get it.
Are you mad at Stuart? Or
I'm not mad at
she was
Stuart.
mad-
I'm
mad
mad
at me.
Yes, I'm
Well-
mad at. Can't we objectify them by
That
the
makes
things that they've said?
That
or
makes
the-
me feel like I should have said this in response to you. There have been many sessions where I fantasize about fucking your brains out, riding you till you die. Now, am I objectifying him? How can I move about now? I'm confused.
And now I'm going to move to episode 7. So
I'm just shutting down.
Tell us more about what are you shutting yourself off to?
I reject now feeling like I'm the square one or I'm the frigid one who's like needing to.
You are a feminist. You are a woman who represents women publicly.
Yes. And I guess I value women because we bring a lot to the world, but I don't think that the reason why we need to value them are because of their, what did you say, because of their lips? Because we
But Pam, he values Tilda and he values Rebecca because of who they
Absolutely.
are and their lips.
I agree.
And there are times where I enjoy being objectified.
I agree,
by the
but I'm
person
just
that
curious what it
attracted
is that
to.
he's trying to bring out. I don't understand what.
He wants him to just be honest about his feelings, that's all.
It's more than that. Much more than that.
Yeah.
If you can sit in your seat and be on the receiving end of attention and not have it harm you and not do any harm to the person who's providing it, assuming that what they're saying is inviting, assuming that what they say recognizes you, doesn't demean you or diminish you, but
Right.
recognizes all of who you are.
Yes.
You can sit in your seat and you can receive that and you can be available to it, benefit from it, and then know in turn what you feel toward the other person. That's the safest sex you'll ever have. That's expanding your capacity to tolerate recognition, acknowledgement, sexuality.
Sure.
All of the most primary things that we could feel for other people.
Sure.
Well, there's safety in that. That's expanding.
I guess I just feel like it sets us in some ways all back. Of course.
I don't think it sets us back, Pam.
I mean,
I think it brings us forward.
okay, lots happening in this segment here. So what observations, thoughts are you having?
So for me, I thought that what you said, Ezra, about if you can sit in your seat and receive attention and hear what people have to say and you're safe, then that moves us forward. And you were talking about sex, but for me, I thought, why is this not true about race when we're in group? Because so often when race comes up, they're squirming and moving away and generalizing. And like, if people can sit in their seats in group and hear what other people have to say, however hard that is, then doesn't that move us forward? Isn't that expanding? So to me, I love that and just wonder, why is it that so many group therapists struggle to do that with race?
Great question.
For me, I kind of went to, again, my area is often thinking about how we were socialized, and as how I'm socialized as a white person, how a Black man is socialized, and projected onto. So it's both projections too. So I was wondering if a question like, how have we all been socialized in our society, that might cause the topic of sex to have different levels of danger and safety. So depending on your identity, racial and gender identity in our society has very different implications. And I think Tilda's ability to speak so freely is the freedom of a white woman to talk about sex and it not have any ramifications in terms of arrests or in terms of killing, but for a Black man. And so I think you were, trying to be with Stuart and invite him in, but not recognizing him as a Black man and what that might mean in terms of his own safety to speak freely about.
Actually, I thought I did when I said to him, outside of here, that might be crazy. And I made a distinction between outside, suggesting, at least in my mind, I was thinking, yes, this could get you in real trouble outside of here, but inside of here, there's safety.
Yeah, you did say that, and I totally got that. But I think there's what's happening of the outside is also in the inside. And so to assume that women and men aren't thinking about their own limitations or what is safe. I guess the issue of safety is felt and experienced differently, no matter whether you're outside or inside of group. And I think acknowledging that would be useful in bringing the racialized idea of what it means to talk about sex, given our positionality in society.
So maybe that's a stylistic difference, because in my mind, I'm doing that by inviting the discussion. I want Stuart to be able to say, I don't feel safe to do that because I'm a Black man. I'm looking at a white woman, talking to a white woman, talking to an Asian woman. I want him to be able to tell me that. I don't want to impose that on him. And if he's having trouble telling me that, I see that as a resistance for me to study. My job is to study and analyze resistance. Mm-hmm. So that's, in my mind, that's a resistance. If that's happening, I would see that as a resistance to Stuart having the freedom to tell me just that.
Right, Elliot, Elliot. I think what I'm suggesting is if the therapist doesn't offer, you don't really bring race into any of the groups. Some of the members will bring it up, and I guess right. I would say, as a leader, you create. Or leaders create the opportunity to talk about things, whether it be sex or race or whatever. And so, kind of like what Farouk said, there's many different ways you can go, but we're looking at what could been more of an invitation to explore on a deeper level by just not saying outside of here. There's a lot of reasons, but to be able to bring it more overtly as something the whole group processes could have been an option as well.
And to do that, you might have said what? How would you have done that?
Kind of what I said, we're socialized in different ways. When I say it's safe in here, I wonder what it's like in your body as your gender and race, what it would feel like to express yourself freely in here, knowing that it might not be safe outside of here.
Mm-hmm. I can see that.
I think these are all wonderful comments. And one of the things that I also kind of want to talk about a little bit of when I first time I saw this segment was, again, another issue of equity that is coming up, which is a challenging piece for groups to deal with. Is it feminist to be able to say that you shouldn't objectify, or should it be able that women express their desire? So the equity among genders is another issue that is coming up in here. It is interesting that the dialogue again becomes among two white women. And I was thinking about it as I was watching it again before this discussion, that I think I have been, and most of us have been, more sensitized to the diversity, equity, and inclusive aspects of it over the last year. When this was filmed, maybe at that time, even in the minds of the participants, they may not go that immediately to the discussion of race than if this was happening today. Because the last year, it has really hit us in the face, all the racism in the country. Many things that were underground are now much more in the open over the last year. So it is also a time that we are dealing with this and looking at this. I think that the issue, now I'm looking at it, that Stuart, and so now as Ezra says that it was a little bit protective of Stuart to not ask him to talk about it as a Black man. And I can certainly see that. Otherwise, eventually I would hope that he will get there in the group somewhere, that he will be able to talk about the racial difference in there. And, being the Asian woman, what does it mean to be objectified? What does it, all of those pieces are in there. So I'm hoping that, this is the kind of thing that we're looking at it a year or later after.
I appreciate you saying that, Farouk, because this was actually filmed in 2017. This segment was filmed in 2017. So clearly, the awakening over the past year and a half has brought things to our attention that may have been there before, hopefully, but certainly not as prominently as it is now. So as I'm listening to your reactions, particularly you, Michelle, I'm thinking that, you know, I have my way of doing things, and now it is going to take some additional consciousness on my part to expand the discussion to include race in a different way. So it might actually mean inviting discussion that I, in the past, would be waiting for. In the position of group leader, group analyst, I tend to follow the contact function. I tend to go where the group goes. And if the group is reluctant to or lax in their effort to move in the direction that's difficult, I can see how, particularly when it comes to racial issues, how important it would be to add that to the technique, add that to the leadership position that I'm in. That would be different.
If I could just caution us, I know that George Floyd was an awakening for a lot of people, but I just want to caution us in that there have been a lot of people for centuries fighting for issues of liberation and social justice. And so just to be mindful that because something is newer to our consciousness or more recently moved to the front of our consciousness, that isn't the reality or truth for so many. And we want to be careful about that.
For sure, for sure.
Well, I wanted to say, I felt like we were centering whiteness in that too, to say that this wasn't an issue of awareness. I think it was an issue of awareness, maybe not for as many white people. And so I think sometimes we get through the lenses because now that it's become more on my plate, to use your dinner metaphor, now I can see what I'm eating. But the idea is that it was always part of the menu. It just wasn't always ordered. And so now we're asking people to recognize it's on your plate. And it's really about acknowledging and then allowing the group to do something with it or not. And if they're not doing something with it, to be curious about that.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. Even if it is coming to consciousness now, it is too late to awareness now. And I think that it was not on the group. So we see the evolution of the society as a whole. It may not have been as much on the consciousness of that group that was in 2017, but when it meets later, it is much more there. So I think that's something that we see the evolution of the whole society.
Any thoughts, Aaron?
Yeah, I was still thinking about the intervention that you suggested, Michelle, which I really liked. I like the language you used and the way you put it. And I'm just aware that one of the challenges that I face is partly language, that when I'm very reluctant to raise macro level concepts in a group, because what I find is the white people latch onto it right away and want to engage in racism as an intellectual discussion rather than something that's experienced day in, day out. So what I really like about the language you used is it made it much more immediate, like what's happening right now. And it didn't keep it at the level of socialization, which is such a abstract concept that I think lets white people think they're engaging in something emotionally immediate that isn't. So I really liked what you said.
Thank you. And I also appreciate that, Aaron. I also want to acknowledge Elliot, just you saying to be able to do something different than what you've done. I really appreciate that, because I think that's, we all get comfortable in how we do things. And I think you acknowledging that there's a new way or a possibility that I hadn't relied on before is really what this whole talk is about. It's like trying to understand, I feel comfortable doing it this way, and now I have the opportunity to get a little uncomfortable and try it another way. And that's what racism is. It's messy. And so as group leaders, we're saying, I'm ready to get into the mess and not always know how to do it. And I think it's good modeling. So I just wanted to appreciate what you said, Ellie. And thank you, Erin.
Okay, moving on to number 3 then. In this third segment, which is in season 2, episode 2, the group is now meeting on Zoom after the pandemic shut down in-person groups. Stuart, Manny, and Tilda are engaged in a discussion prompted by the Black Lives Matter movement in the country and the focus on racism and activism.
A lot of that pressure that was on me was self-inflicted. And I had, no, and it's great what you said. I agree that no one should pressure anybody to be like, hey, because you're not doing this, you're not a part of this historic moment.
But you know, Stuart, my experience has been that on social media, the people who are sort of like policing how people are active are white people.
Yes.
And it's my white liberal friends who are telling me how I'm supposed to react to this moment. And they're telling me what books I have to read and what this I have to do. When, guess what? I didn't just learn that racism started yesterday. Sorry, I have a lot of anger about this because I feel like all these people are having this realization that racism exists in this country. Since I was 2 years old, I heard people tell my dad to speak English, you know? So there is no realization about this moment. There is no like, I've gone to the protest because I really felt that I wanted to, but it's so crazy to me how it's still white people who are judging us or telling us how to be active instead of shutting the fuck up and letting us lead the fucking charge for once, you know? Like,
well, yeah,
sorry,
I mean,
I'm getting really, I'm like getting really heated about this.
But there's something about having your white allies who are the ones that are actually gaining knowledge, and they're excited about this knowledge that they're making sure to push it and to preach it, you know, because they're the ones that we need to tell the other white people who are just thinking that racism has just popped out of nowhere, that it's been here. Because it's sometimes you can't receive information unless it's coming from somebody who looks like you.
Okay.
So I think that if I start out by my reactions to this segment, it is something that we talked about earlier, how sometimes on one hand, the people who are the target of the aggression, target of the racism, are also expected to be the one to point it out in all segments and all sections. So this segment is very well dealing with how to become more inclusive in some ways, to bring that in, that, you know, it's not white or black, it's everybody's job to maybe speak to that, and everybody has their role to play. But then the reaction that when somebody is a minority is also being told, this is how you should be feeling. And that, you know, as Aziza's point earlier, this, you know, discrimination has been and racism has been going on for centuries. It's not something new for people who are a target of it. So I think that it brings complex segment that brings in all of these things into play. But also I see the evolution of the group, that now the group is much more focused into being able to talk about the race and the anger at the race. So initially, if we think of it in terms of group development, initially the group is getting to know each other, and more kind of topics can be gradually they're getting to the place of topic. They can talk about sex first, but then they can talk about race too. So it's getting to be an evolution also in terms of group development. So those are the things I was seeing in this segment.
That's lovely. I like that idea of evolution and being willing to go deeper into conflict. I think what stood out for me is one, the white people were I don't know what it is with me and names. Tilda was kind of nodding, and there's a quick opportunity for her to take in the good white person. And so I think just being aware of Manny is sharing his anger, but it's sharing it on, you know, the people that post on his sites or whatever. And so inviting him to be able to explore his anger with people in the group. And it felt like Stuart was kind of quickly going to the white allies and how much he appreciate. And so I just would wonder, again, is his anger not safe enough to be brought in the group? And I might ask, Stuart, what might appreciating the white allies be doing for you rather than joining Manny's anger? And so kind of inviting him to also give room for his own anger in the group, and can he trust that the group can hold him with his anger rather than fear him. So those are just some initial thoughts.
That's a fine point. And the same thing could have been done with Manny when he spoke about his pages. I could have invited him to say, well, is there anyone here in the room toward whom you have those ideas, of those feelings? So to bring it back into the room would have been very helpful.
Yeah, I was thinking along the lines of what Michelle was saying, you know, as Stuart is talking about having these allies out there, what do you want your allies in here to do? Who feels like an ally in here? What, you know, bringing that very much. And then of course, Manny was very brave with his anger, and doing exactly what you said, to give him space for, what does that look like in here? And here, because that had come up in the first segment, you feel like somebody white is telling you what to do, and whether or not there's merit to that or not, there's a feeling to that. It's complicated, it's nuanced. And so can we dig into that a bit?
It also brought up something very significant in terms of being a minority, and how do we feel about all of this discussion going on in the group, but in the community, and the racism that's going on. Because Stuart started talking about his guilt of not being out there and demonstrating, kind of feeling like that he should have been out there or something like that, as if it is. And that was a very interesting point again to bring up into the group about there's Tilda, the white woman who's going and sleeping at the, earlier they said in the segment that she was going and sleeping at the protest, and he was not. And the difference between there, and how does he experience it? So I think that it brings up, you know, everything that race brings up in everybody, and how people identify, and what brings on the guilt, as well as the you know, capacity to go out and protest or not. So those are significant things, and those could have been explored more. Again, there are, in a group, there are so many avenues to go every time, pathways with choice with the intervention we make, that we could have gone more there as well.
Yeah, I think because we talked about safety. I'm sorry, Aaron, you can go ahead.
No, go ahead, Aziza.
Well, just even you know, to Farouk's point, us going out to protest, if we're different, right? There's a different level of danger to my body when I'm out there in the street protesting versus somebody else's body. And as much as I appreciate that, also just being able to recognize that there's a difference there. We're putting our bodies on the line in very different ways. And so working with that guilt for somebody, that urgency for somebody else, and how those things intersect with their racial identities.
I think, just to speak off of that, when you bring in the bodies, to invite more of what's happening in our bodies, as anger is swelling up, and maybe inviting us to take a pause and just to go into our bodies a little bit more, because I could see maybe some people shutting down, or maybe numbing and sitting back, and some people having the fire or the energy, and so just, you know, inviting people to go into their bodies and notice what's happening, and allowing just more of, I don't know, when you said that, Aziza, I was thinking of just bringing the bodies and allowing us to speak from that, because that is so prevalent, that we often, how different bodies are experienced, but also harmed in our society.
Well, if I could just piggyback off of this, I know you wanted to make this point, Michelle, about how in talking about COVID, which they did in the earlier segment, right? Like, we're all in the pandemic, but it's a very different pandemic, right? It's the same pandemic, but the impact based off of our resources and our privileges and all those sort of things has made it and continues to make it quite a different experience for people. And one of the things for me in the racial justice protests, every go round, there are always allies out there. And in some places, they actually do put their bodies, they surround Black and brown bodies with their white identified bodies on purpose, to say, you will not hurt these people. We are going to all be out here, but I'm going to use my privilege in that way. And it feels like, as they're sort of talking about that, that's a beautiful thing to sort of bring in when we're looking at how we can use our bodies in service of each other. And Aaron, I know I cut you off again, so I'm just gonna.
No, it's Zoom. We talked at the same time. You didn't cut me off. I love what you all are saying. I was just putting myself in the group leader position again in that vignette, and it was reminding me how sometimes when racial conflict comes up in my groups, when it's going well, I can feel such a sense of relief that I will not make interventions that might stir the pot. In other words, when, especially if things are being split off, to allow for what seems like a constructive exchange, I'm aware in my countertransference that I can collude with that process sometimes. So I was just being reminded of that countertransference during the vignette.
So Aaron, it's as group leaders, it's always our job to keep in mind our countertransference. That's what I'm doing every session all the time, hopefully, and still not catching it fully. But one of the things that happens is, as you're talking about this, it's reminding me of having the optimal degree of heat in the group for things to cook, but not to burn.
I like that.
Yeah, you have a good way with words. I think what one of the larger themes for me of all of these group sessions, not just the segments, there are like overt comments that need to be attended to the larger structural and socialization issues, but there are also invisible things as when you hold privileged identities. So whether it be white, whether it be able-bodied, whether it be, you know, gender. And so that we have to hold them in the mind of the therapist and be recognizing when they might be playing out. And sometimes we speak to them. And sometimes we don't, but then question why aren't we speaking to them, and keeping them in mind that they might be a part of the water of the group, but not be explicitly talked about. So I think that's kind of this overarching theme of all of our groups and of these videos, but this sense of like what is spoken overtly and what's not spoken, and how do we invite it to be spoken, I think is important. And then the other thing I just wanted to say is this idea of centering whiteness. How might we reinforce comfort to white people, or not inviting certain reflections that could take us as white leaders out of our comfort? And I think that's kind of what you were saying, Aaron. Those are two kind of overarching themes for me as I was watching these series, which is excellent. Like, they're excellent, and through a racial lens, I think these things that are standing out. I feel like there's sunshine coming on me in all different ways, so I apologize for that too.
So I want to speak to what's being said, and especially pick up on what Aaron said, and maybe tie it to white privilege, because in the group, I try to run the group as a leader with myself in the background unless called upon. So when there's an opportunity to work on transference issues, I'm present and accounted for. For the most part, though, I think my goal is to help the group members become the effective healing element in the process. So the group process is not so much centered on me, the group leader, the privileged white male group leader at that, but that individual members and collectively, the members are the healing element in the process. So I think there's a great tension that we hold, no matter who we are as people, in that process. There's a great tension between wanting to step in and call attention to something and challenge the group in some way that might further highlight some of these issues that we're talking about today, versus the idea of just holding that. I may have those ideas in my mind, but elect not to talk about them because the group hasn't gotten there yet. And because I don't want to be the one I might see it first and be the last to name it. I think that's my goal. See it, but don't be the one to name it. Let the group, or explore why the group might not be naming it on occasion. But certainly not to set myself up as the fountain of knowledge that's going to somehow enrich the process for everyone here.
I think, Elliot, you're bringing up an excellent point, because as a leader, whether as a white leader or me as a minority leader, we still have a lot of privilege. And sometimes we have a lot of power, and we can push the group to where they are not ready to go. That's why the evolution is very important.
Yeah.
I think I understand that. And I think that sometimes again, because we live in the society that we live in and we're steeped in what we're steeped in, there is a dynamic and there is a tendency for the group as a microcosm to be recreating that. And so I don't know that we start the group off with a lecture about anti-racism, but it has to, I think sometimes we do have to be more explicit around issues of race and culture, because otherwise that our society says that we are complicit. We don't say anything. You don't talk about these things. You don't bring them up. You don't point them out. You don't confront. You don't whatever. So I think that just sometimes may warrant a bit more of directness or activity.
No, I absolutely agree. That's my takeaway here today, as you said, is that there are occasions in the process when I, as the leader of the group, could say something to expand the discussion in the direction of awareness around racial issues, for example, and that's a valuable piece of learning.
And Aaron, the thing you said about your countertransference, I think we all feel that sometimes around different things. So one of the things I try and do is, and encourage other people to do, is like, nothing is the end. We take this conversation wherever we take it today, but like, we can always come back. And if next week something's been sitting with, if in 2 weeks, if a year later you say that thing you said has been eating at me, it's always okay to bring it up. And so like, I think if we can free ourselves from this, like, well, group is over, so that's done, then we can free our members up too, to like, it's okay. We're gonna miss some things sometimes in the moment. We can always revisit them.
It's an excellent point, and I just wanted to add to that a little bit of what it was not about these segments, but just a thought that I had about this series. In some ways, there's nothing ideal, and we're always looking for what would be ideal. So one of the things would be that there are a lot of singletons in the group. And the impact on the group of being a singleton, if you're the only black male, if you're the only, one, whatever might be discussed, only gay person. So that kind of thing is challenging. And, we want to make sure that we pay attention. We would have singletons in the group because everybody in the end is alone, but still to pay attention to the racial dynamics of that could be a useful way for bringing it in.
And I would want to expand it. Today we focus more on race, but it's really a consciousness of all the privileged identities. And this was mentioned by someone earlier too, but just emphasizing that wherever we hold more privileged identities, we tend to be less aware. And so it's really, really valuable for us to be constantly looking at what we're not attending to. Because that's probably where there's going to be marginalization happening potentially in our groups.
Well, on that note, I feel so inspired listening to all of you talk, and I thank you so much for bringing your whole selves to this discussion. I think it will be a real gift to the AGPA community. I hope it will start a number of conversations about all the ways we can open our ears and open our eyes as group leaders to be more effective. So thank you again, Elliot, Aaron, Aziza, Michelle, and Farouk for joining us today. And maybe we'll do this again someday, who knows?
Thank you, Jen.
Thank you, Jen, for
Thank you.
Everyone.